The room went silent the moment Marcus opened his mouth. Elena Hartley stood near the marble staircase of the Kensington Grand, holding a glass of sparkling water she had not touched. She had spent 3 months saving for the dress she wore tonight, a deep emerald gown that finally made her feel like herself again after a long, difficult year. For the first time in months, she had walked into a room without flinching. That feeling lasted exactly 4 minutes. "Well, look who decided to squeeze into a dress," Marcus said, loud enough for the circle of guests around him to hear. He raised his glass toward her like he was offering a toast, though his tone carried no warmth at all. "I almost didn't recognize you. Guess the buffet at your new job is doing wonders." A ripple of laughter passed through the small crowd near the champagne table. Not everyone laughed. Some looked away, uncomfortable, unwilling to meet Elena's eyes. But enough people laughed that the sound of it filled her ears like static, drowning out the string quartet playing somewhere behind her. Elena felt her face grow hot. She wanted to disappear into the floor, to become invisible the way she used to when she was a teenager, and people said things about her body that she carried for years afterward. She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Her hands trembled slightly around the stem of her glass. Marcus had been her fiancé for 2 years. He had a talent for finding the exact words that would leave a mark long after the moment had passed. She thought she had escaped that. She thought leaving him 8 months ago meant she would never have to stand in a room and feel small again. She was wrong. "Marcus, that's enough," said a woman near him, though she said it quietly, almost as if she did not want him to hear. He ignored her. He took a step closer to Elena, swirling his drink, clearly enjoying the attention he had gathered. "I'm just saying, you used to take care of yourself. What happened? Did the breakup really hit you that hard?" Elena's throat tightened. She could feel eyes on her from every direction now, the kind of attention that made her skin crawl. She had come to this gala because her company was one of the sponsors, because she had worked 11 months rebuilding her confidence brick by brick, and because she had promised herself she would stop letting one man decide how she felt about her own reflection. And then, without warning, everything in the room shifted. A man near the far end of the hall set down his glass. He did not raise his voice. He did not rush. He simply began walking, and the crowd around him parted the way water parts around a stone, quietly, instinctively, as if every person in that room had learned long ago not to stand in his way. Elena did not know him. She had heard his name whispered at other events, always with a certain caution attached to it, the way people speak about weather that might turn dangerous. Dante Moretti. He was the kind of man whose presence changed the temperature of a room before he even spoke. Tall, composed, dressed in black that looked less like fashion and more like armor, he crossed the marble floor with the unhurried confidence of someone who had never once needed to raise his voice to be heard. He stopped directly beside Elena, close enough that Marcus's smirk faltered for the first time all evening. "Say that again," Dante said. His voice was low, even, almost gentle in tone, which somehow made it more unsettling than if he had shouted. Marcus blinked, clearly unprepared for anyone to intervene. "I'm sorry. Do I know you?" "You don't need to know me," Dante said. "You need to apologize to her." A few guests nearby had gone completely still, their champagne flutes frozen halfway to their lips. Elena felt her heart pounding so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. Marcus attempted a laugh, though it came out thin and forced. "Look, I don't know what this is about, but I was just having some fun. She used to be my fiancée. I think I'm allowed to joke around." "There's a difference between a joke and cruelty dressed up as one," Dante said. "You've crossed that line twice in the last minute. I'm not interested in seeing a third." The room had gone so quiet that the string quartet's music seemed to be playing from another building entirely. Elena glanced at Dante, unsure whether to feel grateful or mortified that this confrontation was happening in front of half the city's elite. Marcus's eyes darted around, searching for support from the crowd that had laughed with him only moments earlier. He found none. People who had smiled at his jokes now stared at their shoes, at the chandeliers, at anything that was not his face. "This is ridiculous," Marcus muttered, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. He set his glass down on a passing tray a little too hard, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "I don't even know why I'm explaining myself to a stranger." "Then don't explain," Dante said. "Just leave." For a long moment, Marcus looked as though he might argue further. Then his gaze flicked to Elena, to the way she stood a little straighter now, to the man beside her who clearly was not someone to be tested twice. Something in his expression shifted, some calculation running behind his eyes, and he decided the fight was not worth whatever it might cost him. "Enjoy your evening," he said stiffly, and walked away toward the exit, his shoulders tight, his pace quicker than a man trying to look unbothered should ever walk. The moment he disappeared through the doors, the room seemed to exhale. Conversations slowly resumed around them, though quieter now, and several curious glances lingered on Elena and the man who had just stepped in to defend a stranger. Elena turned to face him properly for the first time. Up close, his eyes were a deep, unreadable brown, and there was a stillness to him that felt almost unnatural, as though he had trained himself long ago never to show more than he intended to. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "I know," he replied. "Then why did you—" He considered the question for a moment, as if he were not entirely sure of the answer himself. "Because nobody else in this room was going to." Elena felt something in her chest loosen, a tension she had been carrying since the moment Marcus opened his mouth. She was not used to strangers standing up for her. She was not used to anyone noticing her discomfort before she had to explain it out loud. "I'm Elena," she said, extending a hand that was still not entirely steady. "Dante," he said, shaking it briefly. His grip was firm, controlled, like everything else about him. "You handled that better than most people would have." "I didn't handle it at all. I just stood there." Standing your ground while someone tries to humiliate you in public is its own kind of handling it, he said. "Most people either shrink or explode. You did neither." Elena studied him for a moment, trying to reconcile the rumors she had heard about him with the calm, almost thoughtful man standing in front of her. People at these events spoke about Dante Moretti in careful, measured tones, the way one might discuss something powerful and unpredictable. She had heard he ran businesses that stretched far beyond anything printed on a business card. She had heard he was not someone people crossed without consequence. And yet here he was, quietly making sure a stranger did not spend the rest of her evening feeling small. "Thank you," she said finally, "truly." "You don't need to thank me for expecting basic decency from people," Dante said. "Are you all right?" The question caught her off guard. Most people, if they addressed the incident at all, would have offered a quick, awkward comment before changing the subject entirely, eager to move past the discomfort. Dante simply waited for an actual answer, his attention fully on her, as though nothing else in the crowded ballroom mattered in that moment. "I will be," Elena said honestly. "It's not the first time. I just didn't expect it tonight." "It shouldn't happen any night," he said. "Come, let me get you something to drink, something that isn't sparkling water you're too upset to finish." She almost laughed, surprised he had noticed such a small detail. "How did you know I hadn't touched it?" "You've been holding the same glass since I walked over. The bubbles have gone flat." Elena looked down at her glass, realizing he was right. There was something faintly unsettling about how observant he was, but it did not feel invasive. It felt, oddly, like being seen for the first time in a long while. They walked together toward a quieter corner of the ballroom, away from the cluster of guests, still murmuring about what they had just witnessed. Elena caught a few curious glances directed their way, whispers passing between groups of people who clearly recognized Dante and were trying to understand why he had involved himself in a stranger's humiliation. "People are staring," she said quietly. "They stare at everything," Dante replied, unbothered. "It rarely means anything. They're staring because of you, not me." "Then let them wonder," he said simply. "It's not the first time I've given people something to talk about." Elena felt a small, unexpected smile tug at her lips, the first genuine one since she had arrived at the gala. For a moment, standing beside this quiet, composed stranger, the humiliation from earlier felt distant, almost like it had happened to someone else. She did not know yet that this single moment, this small act of interference from a man the city both feared and respected, would unravel the careful, quiet life she had built for herself. She did not know that Dante Moretti rarely stepped into other people's affairs, and that his choice to do so tonight had already been noticed by more people than the ones currently whispering behind their hands. All she knew, standing there in the glow of the chandeliers with her humiliation slowly fading, was that for the first time in a very long while, she did not feel invisible. And somewhere across the room, near the exit Marcus had stormed through only minutes earlier, a man in a dark suit lowered his phone after finishing a brief message to someone who would want to know exactly what had just happened, and exactly who Dante Moretti had chosen to protect. Dante did not leave her side for the rest of the evening. At first, Elena assumed he would walk her to a quiet corner, offer a polite word, and then return to whatever important conversations a man like him usually attended at events like this. Instead, he stayed. He introduced her to a few people he trusted, steering conversations away whenever anyone brought up what had happened with Marcus. He seemed to have a quiet talent for redirecting attention, the way a skilled conductor might guide an orchestra without anyone noticing the hand movements behind it. "You don't have to babysit me," Elena said at one point, half amused, half embarrassed by the attention. "I'm not babysitting you," Dante replied. "I'm making sure nobody else feels brave enough to try what he tried." "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise," he said, and something in the way he said it made her believe him completely. By the time the gala began winding down, Elena had laughed more times than she expected to that night, mostly at Dante's dry, understated humor, delivered so calmly that she often needed a second to realize he had made a joke at all. He was nothing like the cold, distant figure she had heard described in hushed conversations over the years. Or perhaps he was exactly that person with everyone else, and something about tonight had simply been different. "Let me take you home," he said, as the last of the guests began filing toward the exit. Elena hesitated. She barely knew this man. Everything about him suggested power, control, and a life far removed from her modest apartment and quiet routine. Yet something about his presence felt steady, rather than threatening, like standing near a fire that warmed instead of burned. "I have a car ordered already," she said. "Cancel it." She raised an eyebrow. "Is that how you ask for things?" For the first time that night, something that might have been the beginning of a smile crossed his face. "I'm asking. You're free to say no." She thought about it for a moment longer than necessary, weighing the strange pull she felt toward accepting against the voice of caution, reminding her she knew almost nothing about him. In the end, curiosity, and something warmer than curiosity, won. "All right," she said. "But if this turns out to be strange, I'm blaming you." "Fair enough." The car that waited outside was sleek and black, driven by a quiet man who nodded at Dante without a word exchanged between them, as though years of routine had made conversation unnecessary. Elena settled into the leather seat, suddenly aware of how tired she was, the adrenaline from earlier finally beginning to fade and leave exhaustion in its place. "Thank you again," she said as the car pulled away from the curb, city lights sliding past the windows. "For earlier. I don't think I properly told you what that meant." "You don't need to keep thanking me," Dante said, "but you're welcome." "Do you always step in like that, for strangers?" He was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the passing streets outside. "No," he admitted finally. "I don't." "Then why me?" It was the same question she had asked him earlier at the gala, but this time she wanted a real answer, not the polite deflection he had offered before. Dante turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the shifting light from the street lamps. "Because the way he spoke to you reminded me of something I don't like being reminded of, and because you didn't deserve it. Sometimes those two things are enough to make a man who usually stays out of other people's business decide not to this time." Elena studied him, trying to read more into the words than he had offered. There was something guarded beneath his calm exterior, some old wound he had not fully explained but had clearly touched on without meaning to. She decided not to push further, sensing that some doors needed time before they could be opened all the way. "Can I ask what you do?" she said instead, steering toward safer ground. "People at the gala talked about you like you were some kind of legend, or a warning." "Both, probably," Dante said. "I run several companies, import and export mostly, along with some property investments across the city." "That's the polished version, isn't it?" He glanced at her, something like respect flickering behind his eyes. "You're sharper than most people who ask that question." "I didn't ask what version you wanted to give me. I asked what you do." "Some things are easier explained slowly," he said. I'd rather you get to know the person before you decide what to think of the business." It was not an answer, not really, but it was an honest admission that there was more beneath the surface than he was willing to share yet. Elena found, oddly, that she respected the honesty of his evasion more than she would have respected an outright lie. "Fair enough," she said, echoing his own words back to him. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the city passing by in streaks of gold and white light. Elena found herself sneaking glances at him, trying to reconcile the composed, careful man beside her with the whispered stories she had heard over the years, stories that painted him as someone dangerous, someone people avoided crossing at all costs. Nothing about the man sitting across from her matched that description, not directly, though she sensed the capacity for it lived somewhere beneath his calm exterior, held in check by choice rather than absence. "Tell me about yourself," Dante said eventually, breaking the silence. "Not the version you give people at galas, the real one." Elena laughed softly, surprised by the direct request. "That's a big ask for someone I've known for a few hours. I gave you an honest, if incomplete, answer about myself. It seems fair to ask the same in return." She considered it, turning her glass of water in her hands out of habit, though she had left it behind at the ballroom. "I work in marketing for a design firm downtown. I used to be engaged, obviously, to Marcus, before he decided my worth depended on a number on a scale. I left him 8 months ago, and it's been the hardest and best decision I've ever made. I'm rebuilding, I suppose. Slowly. Rebuilding what, exactly? Myself, mostly. My confidence. My sense of what I deserve from people." She paused, surprised at her own honesty with a man she barely knew. "I don't usually talk about this so easily. Maybe you needed someone who wouldn't judge you for it." "Maybe," she admitted. The car slowed as it approached her apartment building, a modest structure a world away from the kind of residence Elena imagined a man like Dante called home. She felt a flicker of embarrassment at the contrast, though he showed no sign of noticing or caring about the difference. "This is me," she said, as the car came to a stop. "I know. I had your address before we left the gala." Elena blinked. "That's slightly unsettling." "It's practical," Dante said, though a faint trace of amusement colored his tone. "I like knowing where the people I care about are safe. You barely know me. I know enough to know I'd like to know more," he said simply. The directness of the statement caught her off guard, and for a moment neither of them spoke, the quiet hum of the car's engine the only sound between them. Elena felt her pulse quicken, unsure whether it was nerves or something else entirely. "Would you like to have dinner with me sometime?" Dante asked. Not a gala, not a crowd of people whispering about who I am or what I do. Just dinner. Elena hesitated, old caution warring with the pull she felt toward him. "I don't know very much about your world, Dante, and from what little I've gathered tonight, it sounds like a complicated one." "It is," he admitted without hesitation. "I won't pretend otherwise. But I'm not asking you to step into all of it tonight. I'm asking for dinner." She studied him for a long moment, searching his expression for any sign of the danger she had been warned about in whispered conversations over the years. She found none, only quiet patience, and something that looked, strangely, like hope held carefully in check. "All right," she said finally. "Dinner, but you're explaining the import and export business a little more honestly next time." Something in his expression eased, a small victory reflected in the slight shift of his shoulders. "Deal." She stepped out of the car, and he walked her to the entrance of her building, his presence steady beside her in the cool night air. At the door, she turned to face him one final time. "Good night, Dante." "Good night, Elena." She watched him return to the car, watched the vehicle pull away into the quiet streets, before finally heading inside. As she climbed the stairs to her apartment, replaying the strange, unexpected evening in her mind, she felt lighter than she had in months. The humiliation from earlier now a distant, almost forgotten memory, replaced by something new and uncertain, and, despite every warning bell in her head, something that felt a little like hope. What she did not know, as she settled into bed that night with her phone buzzing quietly on the nightstand from a message she would not check until morning, was that her name had already begun circulating through circles far removed from marketing firms and design offices, circles where the mention of Dante Moretti's sudden public interest in a woman he had met only hours earlier carried weight far beyond a simple act of kindness at a charity gala. In a dimly lit office across the city, a man named Vincent Corradi read a brief message on his phone, his expression unreadable, before setting it down and turning his attention to a folder that had been sitting untouched on his desk for weeks. Dante Moretti did not involve himself with strangers. He never had, not once in the years Vincent had known him, and Vincent had learned long ago that whenever Dante broke his own rules, it was worth paying very close attention to why. 3 days after the gala, Elena found a small velvet box waiting at the reception desk of her office building, addressed to her in handwriting so precise it looked almost printed. Inside was a single earring, the twin of one she had lost months ago and assumed was gone forever, along with a short note that read simply, "Found this. Thought you might want it back. Dinner Friday? Dante." She stared at the earring for a long moment, trying to remember when or where she might have dropped it, before realizing with a small jolt that she had definitely not lost it anywhere near him. She had lost it at a friend's apartment weeks before the gala, in a completely different part of the city. There was no reasonable explanation for how it had ended up in his possession, unless he had gone through considerable effort to track it down simply to have a reason to reach out to her again. The thought should have unsettled her. Instead, standing in the lobby with her coworkers walking past, she found herself smiling. She texted him that evening, a simple message asking how, exactly, he had come to possess an earring she had lost in an apartment across town months earlier. His reply came quickly, brief, and unbothered by the implication behind her question. "I have people who are good at finding things," he wrote. "Friday still stands?" She agreed, telling herself it was simply dinner, nothing more. Even as she spent an unreasonable amount of time deciding what to wear for an evening she kept insisting to herself was not a big deal. Friday arrived, and Dante picked her up personally this time, driving instead of relying on the quiet man from before. The restaurant he chose was small, tucked away on a side street, the kind of place that clearly valued privacy over visibility. No chandeliers, no crowds of curious onlookers whispering behind champagne glasses, just quiet conversation over a meal that lasted far longer than either of them seemed to notice. "You didn't strike me as someone who enjoyed quiet dinners," Elena said, glancing around the nearly empty restaurant. "I expected somewhere flashier." "Flashier draws attention," Dante said. "I don't need attention when I'm trying to actually talk to someone." "Is that what tonight is? Trying to actually talk to me?" "Among other things," he admitted, something warm flickering behind his usual composure. Over the following weeks, their meetings became a quiet, steady rhythm, woven carefully into the edges of Elena's life. Dante never overwhelmed her with grand gestures or demands on her time. Instead, he appeared in small, thoughtful ways. A coffee delivered to her office on a difficult morning, a message checking in after a long day, an evening set aside for dinner, whenever both their schedules allowed. Elena found herself looking forward to these moments more than she wanted to admit, even as a quiet voice in the back of her mind reminded her that she still knew very little about the actual shape of his world. It was during one of these dinners, nearly a month after the gala, that Elena finally worked up the courage to ask the question she had been circling for weeks. "What do you actually do, Dante? And I don't mean the import and export answer you gave me before." He set down his glass, studying her for a long moment before answering. "I run an organization," he said finally, "one that has existed for generations before I inherited it. It involves businesses that are entirely legitimate, and it involves other things that are considerably more complicated. Complicated meaning illegal. Complicated meaning necessary, in a world that doesn't always follow fair rules," he said. "I won't insult you by pretending otherwise. My family has operated in the spaces between legal and illegal for a long time. I inherited responsibilities I didn't choose but couldn't walk away from, not without consequences far worse than the ones I currently manage." Elena absorbed this quietly, turning the information over in her mind. Part of her had known, or at least suspected, given the whispers she had heard about him for years. Hearing it confirmed directly still landed with a certain weight. "Should I be afraid of you?" she asked honestly. "No," Dante said, without hesitation. "I would never allow harm to come to you because of who I am. But I won't lie to you and tell you there's no danger in being close to me. People who wish me ill would not hesitate to use anyone I care about as leverage, if given the chance. That's an alarming thing to say over dinner. It's an honest thing to say, he corrected gently. I'd rather you know the truth now than discover it later and feel betrayed by my silence. Elena appreciated the honesty, even as it introduced a new, quiet anxiety she had not carried before. She thought of Marcus, of the small, cruel humiliations he had inflicted on her over their years together, and compared it to the steady, careful honesty Dante offered, even when the truth was uncomfortable. There was something to be said for a man willing to risk pushing someone away by telling them something difficult, rather than a man who simply chose easier lies. Thank you for telling me, she said finally. I need time to think about what that means, for both of us. Take whatever time you need, Dante said. I'm not going anywhere. She believed him. Over the following weeks, Elena found herself slowly stepping further into the edges of Dante's world, meeting a few of the people closest to him, careful and measured introductions that felt less like tests, and more like Dante genuinely wanting the people he trusted to know her. She met Vincent Carrati, a quiet, watchful man who studied her carefully during their first meeting, clearly trying to determine what kind of woman had captured his employer's attention so completely and so suddenly. He doesn't do this, Vincent told her once, when Dante had stepped away briefly during a quiet dinner at Dante's residence. In all the years I've worked for him, I've never seen him bring someone into this house, not once. Is that meant to reassure me or worry me? Elena asked. Vincent considered the question seriously. Both, I think. It means he trusts you. It also means people are watching more closely than they were before, trying to understand why. Watching who? Trying to understand what? Dante has built a careful, controlled life, Vincent said. Controlled lives don't leave much room for surprises. You are, without question, a surprise. Some people find surprises interesting. Others find them dangerous, something to exploit rather than admire. The words settled uneasily in Elena's chest, a quiet warning wrapped in careful phrasing. She thought about it long after Dante returned, long after the evening ended and she found herself back in her own apartment, staring at the ceiling and turning Vincent's words over in her mind. She did not know, not yet, how quickly those words would prove themselves true. It was nearly 2 months after the gala when Elena first noticed she was being watched. She had gone for her usual evening walk near her apartment, a small routine she had maintained long before Dante entered her life, when she noticed the same dark sedan parked across the street that she had passed twice already on her route. She told herself it meant nothing, that plenty of cars looked similar in the evening light, but something about the stillness of the vehicle, the way it seemed positioned to watch her building, rather than simply parked for the night, left a lingering unease she could not shake. She mentioned it to Dante that evening, expecting reassurance, but instead watched his expression grow carefully controlled in a way that told her he was concerned, even as he worked to keep that concern from showing too plainly. Describe the car, he said. She did, and he was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tightening slightly before he spoke again. I'll have someone look into it. In the meantime, I'd like you to be more careful about your routines. Vary your walks. Let me know your schedule when you can. Dante, you're scaring me. I don't mean to, he said, reaching for her hand across the table, his grip warm and steady, despite the tension in his shoulders. I told you there would be risks. I need you to trust that I will do everything in my power to keep you safe. But I also need you to be careful. Please. Elena nodded, though the unease remained, settling somewhere deep in her chest, a quiet reminder that the world she had stepped into carried weight far beyond quiet dinners and thoughtful gestures. She thought of Vincent's words again, about surprises being either admired or exploited, and wondered, with a growing sense of dread, which category she had become to the people watching Dante's life from the shadows. That night, after Dante dropped her home and made sure, personally, that the street outside her building was clear before leaving, Elena sat by her window for a long time, watching the quiet street below. No dark sedan appeared. No shadow lingered in the doorway across the way. But the quiet, she realized, felt different now than it had 2 months earlier, before a mocked dress and a stranger's interference had changed the entire direction of her life. She thought about Marcus, about the humiliation that felt, now, almost trivial compared to the weight of what she had learned since. She thought about Dante, about the careful honesty he offered even when it complicated things between them. And she thought, with a growing certainty she could not quite explain, that whatever storm was building on the horizon, she did not want to face it by walking away from him. She wanted to face it standing beside him. Across the city, in the same dimly lit office where he had once read a brief message about Dante's unexpected interest in a stranger, Vincent Karate studied a new set of photographs spread across his desk. Photographs of Elena on her evening walk. Photographs taken from a car parked exactly where she had described it. He recognized the faint marking on the vehicle's plate immediately, a marking tied to a family that had held old, unresolved grievances against Dante's organization for years. He picked up his phone and made a call that would not be pleasant for either party involved, knowing that whatever quiet peace Dante and Elena had built over the past 2 months was about to be tested in ways neither of them had yet imagined. Marcus resurfaced exactly 1 week later, though not in a way Elena expected. She first noticed the change at work, in the strange, careful way a few of her co-workers avoided her gaze in the break room, in the whispered conversations that stopped abruptly whenever she entered a room. By midday, a friend from the marketing department finally pulled her aside, showing her a series of messages circulating through a private group chat that had somehow found its way to nearly half the office. The messages, sent from an anonymous account, claimed Elena had used her connections to a dangerous criminal organization to secure her position at the firm, implying threats had been made against management to guarantee her employment. Other messages painted her as manipulative, someone who had latched onto a powerful, feared man for money and protection, rather than any genuine connection. Photographs accompanied the messages, images of Elena and Dante together outside restaurants, at the Gala, walking near her apartment, clearly gathered over weeks of careful surveillance. Elena felt sick reading through them, her hands trembling slightly as she scrolled through message after message, painting her as something she was not. "Do you know who sent these?" her friend asked gently. Elena did not need to guess. The tone, the careful cruelty wrapped in concern, the specific details only someone who had known her intimately would think to include. All of it pointed toward one person, Marcus. She confronted him that evening, arriving unannounced at the small office where he worked, ignoring the surprised glances of his co-workers as she marched past reception and directly to his desk. "Take it down," she said, her voice shaking with barely contained anger. "All of it, now." Marcus looked up at her with an expression of practiced innocence that did nothing to hide the satisfaction flickering behind his eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't insult me by pretending," Elena snapped. "You've been photographing me, spreading lies about my job, about Dante, about things you know nothing about. This ends now." "I'm just concerned for your well-being," Marcus said, his tone dripping with false sincerity. "You've gotten yourself tangled up with a dangerous man, Elena. Someone had to warn people." "You don't get to hide behind concern," she said. "You're doing this because I embarrassed you by walking away, and because you can't stand that I found happiness without you. This is petty and cruel, and I will not let you destroy my reputation because of your own bitterness." Something flickered across Marcus's face, a brief flash of something closer to fear than his usual arrogance allowed. "You should be more careful about who you associate with, Elena. People are asking questions about him, dangerous questions. If you think being close to him keeps you safe, you're wrong." "Is that a warning or a threat?" "Take it however you'd like," he said, though the confidence in his voice had noticeably weakened. "I'm simply saying people far more dangerous than me have started paying attention to your little romance. I'd be careful if I were you." Elena left his office without another word, her heart pounding, his final warning echoing uncomfortably in her mind, despite everything else she wanted to dismiss about him. She called Dante the moment she reached her car, relaying everything Marcus had said, watching her own hands shake against the steering wheel as she spoke. Dante's voice, when he finally responded, carried a controlled tension she had not heard from him before. "I need you to come to my residence tonight. I'll send a car. Please don't argue with me on this." She did not argue. When she arrived, she found Dante in his study, Vincent standing beside him with a tablet displaying a series of photographs and documents Elena did not immediately understand. The atmosphere in the room felt heavier than any she had encountered since meeting Dante, a quiet, controlled urgency replacing the warmth she had grown used to. "What's happening?" she asked, settling into a chair across from his desk. Dante exchanged a brief look with Vincent before answering. "The family that has been watching you, the ones behind the car outside your apartment, they've been rivals of mine for years. Old grievances, older than either of us. They've recently begun probing for weaknesses, testing whether my attention has shifted anywhere they might exploit. And I'm the weakness." "You're someone I care about deeply," Dante corrected gently. "Which, to men like them, amounts to the same thing. They've likely reached out to Marcus, or found him independently, recognizing an easy opportunity to spread doubt and fear, using someone already motivated to hurt you." Elena absorbed this slowly, piecing together the puzzle forming around her. "So Marcus isn't acting alone." "We believe not," Vincent said. "The photographs circulating online show a level of surveillance beyond what a bitter ex-partner could arrange alone. Someone provided him resources, likely in exchange for information about your relationship with Dante." "This is spiraling out of control," Elena said quietly, the weight of the past few hours finally settling fully onto her shoulders. "A month ago, my biggest problem was an ex-fiancé mocking my dress size at a party. Now I'm being used as leverage in some conflict I don't even understand." "I'm sorry," Dante said, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw something close to genuine worry crack through his careful composure. "I should have anticipated this sooner. I should have protected you better." "You couldn't have known Marcus would sell information to strangers," Elena said, though her voice lacked its usual steadiness. "Regardless, the responsibility for your safety rests with me," Dante said firmly. "I won't let this continue. I need you to stay somewhere secure for the next few days while we resolve this. Not as a prisoner, but as a precaution." Elena wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could handle whatever came next without hiding away, but the exhaustion and fear of the past few hours made the offer of temporary safety feel like a small mercy rather than an overreaction. "All right," she said finally, "but I want to understand what's happening. All of it. No more careful half-explanations." Dante studied her for a long moment before nodding. "You deserve that much at least." Over the following 2 days, Elena learned more about the careful, dangerous world Dante navigated than she had in the 2 months prior combined. She learned about the rival family, led by a man named Edmund Castellano, who had spent years searching for any advantage against Dante's organization, any personal weakness that might shift the balance of power in his favor. She learned that Marcus, motivated by resentment and, apparently, a generous payment, had agreed to gather information and spread doubt, believing himself protected from any real consequence by his distance from the actual conflict. She also learned, gradually, that Dante's careful, controlled exterior hid a man far more thoughtful and considerate than the rumors suggested, someone who had spent years building walls, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity, protecting the people close to him from a world that punished vulnerability without hesitation. "Why haven't you simply ended this rivalry?" Elena asked one evening, as they sat together in his study, the tension of the past few days finally beginning to ease slightly. "You clearly have the resources." "Ending it the way you're imagining would cost more than it would solve," Dante said carefully. "There are other ways to resolve conflicts like this, ways that don't require the kind of resolution the old ways of my family's history relied on. I've spent years trying to move my organization away from that path, towards something more legitimate, more sustainable. Edmund represents an old way of doing things I refuse to return to, even when it would be easier. Even now, with me involved? Especially now," Dante said. "I won't let fear push me back into methods I've spent years trying to leave behind. But I also won't let him hurt you while I figure out a better solution." Elena felt a quiet admiration bloom in her chest, watching him navigate an impossible situation, with a restraint that clearly cost him something internally, given the tightness in his jaw whenever the conversation turned toward Edmund Castellano. She thought of Marcus, of his easy willingness to cause harm for personal gain, and compared it silently to the man in front of her, someone clearly capable of far greater consequences than Marcus could imagine, choosing instead a harder, more careful path. On the 3rd day, Vincent arrived with news that shifted the careful balance of the situation entirely. Edmund had grown impatient, apparently unsatisfied with the slow trickle of rumors and doubt spreading through Elena's social circles. He had sent a message directly to Dante, brief and unmistakably clear in its intent, demanding a meeting to discuss what he called a fair resolution to old grievances, using Elena's safety as an implicit bargaining chip. "He wants to meet," Vincent said, sliding the message across the desk toward Dante. "Tomorrow evening, neutral location," he says. But we both know Edmund's definition of neutral rarely favors anyone but himself. Dante read the message slowly, his expression carefully blank, in a way Elena had come to recognize as him working through something dangerous internally. "He's grown bold," Dante said finally, "which means he's grown desperate. Desperate men make mistakes. Or desperate men make dangerous decisions that hurt people who don't deserve it," Elena said quietly, watching him carefully. Dante met her gaze, something resolute settling behind his eyes. "I won't let that happen. Whatever Edmund wants from this meeting, he will not get it through hurting you. I promise you that." Elena wanted to believe him completely, wanted to trust that whatever came next would resolve itself safely, cleanly, without consequence to either of them. But as she watched him and Vincent begin quietly planning for the meeting ahead, discussing logistics and contingencies in low, careful voices, she felt the full weight of the danger settle over her, heavier than anything Marcus's cruel words at the gala had ever made her feel. She had stepped, months ago, into a world of quiet power and careful danger, without fully understanding the risks involved. Now, standing at the edge of a conflict that threatened everything she had begun building with Dante, she realized there was no path forward that did not require facing that danger directly, whatever the cost. She only hoped, watching Dante's controlled, careful determination as he prepared for tomorrow's meeting, that the cost would not be more than either of them could bear. The meeting took place at a quiet estate on the outskirts of the city, a location Edmund Castellano had chosen specifically for its distance from prying eyes and its history as neutral ground between families who had circled each other warily for decades. Elena insisted on coming, despite Dante's initial resistance. "I won't hide while you negotiate my safety without me," she told him firmly, the morning of the meeting. "This concerns me directly. I want to be there." "It could be dangerous," Dante said. "Everything about the past week has been dangerous," she replied. "I'd rather face it standing beside you than waiting anxiously somewhere else, imagining the worst." He studied her for a long moment, something like reluctant respect crossing his features before he finally nodded. "All right, but you stay close to me. No exceptions." She agreed. The estate, when they arrived, was quieter than Elena expected, elegant in a way that felt cold rather than welcoming. Edmund Castellano waited for them in a study filled with old portraits and heavy furniture, a man whose polished appearance did little to soften the calculating sharpness in his eyes. "Dante," Edmund said, rising from his chair with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "And this must be the woman everyone's been talking about. I can see why she's caught your attention." "Let's skip the pleasantries," Dante said, his tone even but carrying an unmistakable edge. "You wanted to discuss a resolution. I'm listening." Edmund's smile faded slightly, replaced by something more businesslike. "Very well. Years of tension between our families have cost us both resources we could have used elsewhere. I propose a formal agreement, a redrawing of certain territories and business arrangements that have long been disputed. In exchange, I'll ensure your companion here faces no further difficulties from parties associated with me." "You're using her safety as a bargaining chip," Dante said flatly. "That's not a resolution, Edmund. That's a threat wearing a suit." "Call it whatever helps you sleep at night," Edmund replied smoothly. "But you and I both know old grievances don't resolve themselves through polite conversation alone. I'm offering you an easier path than the alternative." "And what alternative is that?" Edmund's gaze flicked briefly toward Elena, something calculating passing behind his eyes. "One where certain people continue finding themselves the subject of unfortunate rumors, unfortunate attention, unfortunate circumstances that make quiet, normal lives considerably more difficult. I'd rather avoid that outcome, truthfully. It's messy, and I dislike mess, but I will pursue it if you leave me no better option." Elena felt her pulse quicken, anger and fear tangled together in her chest, as she listened to a man discuss her life so casually, as though she were simply a piece on a board to be moved for someone else's advantage. She glanced at Dante, watching the careful control in his jaw, the restrained tension in his shoulders, and made a decision that surprised even herself. "May I say something?" she asked, her voice steadier than she expected. Edmund raised an eyebrow, clearly not accustomed to being addressed directly by someone he considered simply a bargaining chip. "By all means." "You've spent this entire conversation talking about me as though I'm not in the room," Elena said, "as though my safety is simply a transaction to be negotiated between two men deciding my worth. I won't pretend I'm not frightened by what you're capable of. But I also won't stand here and let you believe threatening me will make Dante bend to whatever terms benefit you most." Edmund's expression flickered, something between amusement and irritation crossing his features. Bold words from someone in a rather precarious position. "Maybe," Elena said, "but cruelty and threats have already been used against me once this month, by a man who thought humiliating me publicly would make me small enough to control. It didn't work then, and it won't work now, no matter how much more dangerous you are than he was." A tense silence settled over the room, broken finally by something unexpected. A low, genuine laugh from Edmund, quiet but real. "I see now why you've broken your own rules for her, Dante. She has more spine than most people twice her experience in this world. She has more integrity than most people in this room combined," Dante said, something protective and proud coloring his tone. "Including you, Edmund." Edmund considered this for a long moment, tapping his fingers thoughtfully against the arm of his chair. "Very well. Let's discuss actual terms then, rather than veiled threats. I have genuine grievances regarding territory disputes from years past. Disputes I believe can be resolved through fair negotiation, rather than continued hostility. The involvement of your companion here was, admittedly, a pressure tactic, one I'm willing to abandon if we can reach reasonable terms on the matters that actually concern me." Dante studied him carefully, clearly recalculating his approach given this unexpected shift. "I'm willing to discuss the territory disputes on their own merits, but threats against Elena end here, permanently, regardless of how our negotiations proceed." "Agreed," Edmund said, extending a hand across the desk. "I have no interest in dragging innocent parties into disputes that predate either of us by decades. Consider the pressure campaign concluded, effective immediately." Dante shook his hand, though Elena could see the careful wariness still present in his posture, unwilling to fully trust the sudden shift in Edmund's demeanor, without further proof of good faith. The negotiations that followed lasted nearly 2 hours, details of territory and business arrangements discussed in careful, measured language. Elena mostly did not fully understand, though she remained present throughout, watching Dante navigate the conversation with a calm precision that left her quietly amazed. By the end of the meeting, both men appeared to have reached an agreement that satisfied neither completely, but resolved the immediate danger threatening Elena's safety. As they left the estate later that evening, Elena finally allowed herself to exhale fully, for the first time in days. "Is it really over?" she asked, as they settled into the car for the drive home. "The immediate danger, yes," Dante said. "Edmund is many things, but he does honor agreements once they're formally established. The territory disputes will take time to fully resolve, but you're no longer part of that conversation." "And Marcus?" Dante's expression hardened slightly. "Marcus will face consequences for his role in this, though not the kind you might be imagining. Legal consequences, professional consequences. Enough to ensure he never considers using you as leverage again." Elena nodded, satisfied with an answer that felt fair rather than excessive, a resolution that punished genuine wrongdoing, without descending into something crueler than the situation warranted. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the tension of the past week slowly draining from both of them as the city lights passed by outside the windows. "I meant what I said in there," Elena said eventually, "about not letting cruelty make me small. I think somewhere along the way, I forgot how strong I actually am. Marcus spent years convincing me otherwise, and I let him." "You're one of the strongest people I've met," Dante said quietly. "I mean that. Watching you stand up to Edmund today, after everything you'd already been through this week, it reminded me why I broke every rule I've ever set for myself the moment I saw Marcus humiliating you at that gala. Why did you really, Elena asked. You never gave me a full answer. Dante was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant, thoughtful. Because I recognized something in the way you stood there, refusing to shrink, even when everyone expected you to. I've spent years building walls around myself, convinced that caring about anyone deeply only gave people leverage to hurt me. But watching you refuse to let cruelty define you, I realized I'd rather risk that vulnerability than keep living behind walls that kept me safe, but also kept me alone. Elena felt something warm bloom in her chest, listening to him offer a vulnerability she suspected he rarely extended to anyone. I'm glad you did, she said softly. Interfere, I mean. That night. So am I, Dante said, reaching for her hand across the seat, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that felt steadier and more certain than anything she had experienced in years. The car pulled up outside her apartment building, familiar and unchanged despite everything that had shifted around her in the weeks since the gala. Elena turned to face him before stepping out, studying the man who had walked into her humiliation and, through quiet, steady actions, rather than grand gestures, helped her rediscover a strength she had nearly forgotten she possessed. What happens now? She asked. Between us, I mean. Whatever you'd like it to be, Dante said. I won't pretend my world is simple, or that being close to me won't occasionally bring complications like the ones we just navigated. But I care about you deeply, Elena, more than I expected to when I first crossed that ballroom weeks ago. I'd like to see where this goes, if you're willing. Elena thought of Marcus, of the cruelty that had once made her feel small and worthless, and compared it to the steady, honest care offered by the man beside her, someone who had shown her, through action rather than empty words, exactly what genuine respect looked like. I'm willing, she said, leaning forward to press a soft kiss against his cheek. More than willing, actually. Something eased fully in Dante's expression, a rare, genuine smile breaking through his usual careful composure. Then I suppose we're doing this properly. No more secrets. No more careful half-explanations. No more secrets, Elena agreed. She stepped out of the car that evening feeling lighter than she had in years, the humiliation of that gala, now a distant memory, replaced by a growing certainty in her own worth and strength. She had walked into that ballroom months earlier, trying simply to survive an evening without being reminded of her old insecurities. She walked into her apartment that night. Instead, as a woman who had faced genuine danger, stood her ground against men far more powerful than Marcus had ever pretended to be, and emerged not diminished but stronger, surer of herself than she had been in years. In the weeks that followed, Elena and Dante built something steady and genuine together, navigating the complicated edges of his world, with an honesty neither of them had expected to find so easily. Marcus faced quiet, professional consequences for his role in the scheme against her, his reputation suffering considerably, as the truth of his actions became known among people who mattered to his career. Edmund Castellano, true to his word, honored the agreement reached that evening, the old rivalry between his family and Dante's, slowly easing into something resembling cautious peace. Elena never forgot the gala, or the humiliation she felt standing beneath the chandeliers, while Marcus mocked her in front of a room full of strangers. But she also never forgot the moment a cold, feared man crossed that same room without hesitation, refusing to let cruelty go unanswered. That single act of interference had changed the entire direction of her life, not simply by introducing her to Dante, but by reminding her, at a moment when she needed it most, that she deserved far better than the smallness others had tried to assign her. She had walked into that gala feeling invisible. She walked out of everything that followed feeling, for the first time in years, completely and unapologetically seen,